In the early 20th century, a cigarette was engineered with a distinct red band around its filter, specifically designed to mask the unsightly smudges of women's lipstick. It was marketed with the delicate, aristocratic slogan, "Mild as May," targeting a sophisticated metropolitan female demographic who attended high society tea dances. Yet, just 3 decades later, this exact same product would completely shed its dainty origins to become the undisputed, rugged titan of global tobacco, anchored by the most aggressively masculine icon in advertising history. How did a failing women's accessory execute a radical transformation to capture the hearts, lungs, and wallets of men worldwide, fundamentally altering the psychology of consumer marketing? The story of this unlikely metamorphosis begins with Philip Morris, a British tobacconist whose company sought to capitalize on the growing, yet still culturally taboo, market of female smokers. The 1924 launch of Marlboro was a calculated play for elegance and exclusivity in a rapidly modernizing society. The name itself was borrowed from Great Marlborough Street in London, evoking a sense of aristocratic refinement and old-world wealth. The executives positioned the cigarette as a luxury item for the liberated woman of the Roaring Twenties, wrapping the brand in an aura of delicate grace that defined its identity for a generation. But elegance could not shield the corporation from a looming existential threat that would soon devastate the entire industry. By the early 1950s, the tobacco market faced a seismic shock as landmark medical studies began publishing undeniable, terrifying links between smoking and lung cancer. A wave of panic swept through the American public, causing sales of traditional, unfiltered cigarettes to plummet overnight. Consumers desperately sought a safer alternative, turning their attention toward filtered cigarettes, which promised a protective, scientific barrier against the deadly tar. This sudden shift in consumer behavior presented a massive financial opportunity, but it was trapped behind a formidable psychological wall. At the time, filter cigarettes were almost exclusively smoked by women and were widely considered effeminate by the broader public. They were viewed as a weak compromise for those who could not handle the harsh, burning smoke of a real cigarette. Men were secretly switching to filters to soothe their hacking coughs, but they were deeply ashamed to be seen buying them, often hiding the packs in their pockets. The executives at Philip Morris recognized this glaring paradox as their flagship filtered brand languished at the absolute bottom of the sales charts, holding less than 1% of the national market share. The delicate positioning of their past was now a fatal corporate liability in a terrified market. To survive the health panic and capture the shifting male demographic, the brand required a complete dismantling of its heritage. They needed to execute a bold rebranding, stripping away 30 years of feminine identity to forge something entirely unprecedented. Before changing the advertising, the company engineered a brilliant piece of structural packaging to force a change in consumer behavior. They introduced the flip-top box, a rigid cardboard container designed to prevent the cigarettes from being crushed in a man's pocket during physical labor. Crucially, this new packaging required the smoker to physically remove the box from their pocket to extract a cigarette, rather than just reaching in and pulling one out. This mechanical necessity guaranteed that the newly designed, striking red and white chevron logo would be flashed in public every single time a man lit up, turning the consumer into a walking billboard. To engineer the psychological resurrection of the brand, Philip Morris turned away from the slick, overly sophisticated advertising agencies of New York's Madison Avenue. Instead, they secured the services of Leo Burnett, a visionary operating out of Chicago who despised the pretentious, hyper-intellectual advertising of his East Coast rivals. Burnett believed in the inherent drama of the product itself, championing a philosophy rooted in plain-spoken, earthy American authenticity. His agency projected an ethos of roll-up-your-sleeves hard work, famous for keeping bowls of fresh apples in the reception area and demanding that executives draft ideas with thick black pencils. The challenge laid before the Chicago agency was monumental, requiring them to convince a post-war American man that a lipstick-hiding filter cigarette was actually a badge of rugged toughness. Burnett retreated to his rural farm, surrounded by stacks of magazines and historical photographs, searching for an archetype that could instantly shatter the existing stigma. He flipped through an issue of Life magazine, and his eyes locked onto a striking black-and-white photograph of a Texas cowboy. In that single quiet moment of inspiration, the delicate tea dances of the Roaring Twenties were permanently erased from the corporate blueprint. The concept Burnett proposed was as simple as it was revolutionary, introducing the world to the Marlboro Man. There would be no celebrities, no scientific claims about the filter's efficacy, and absolutely no mention of the product's dainty past. Instead, the campaign would feature close-up, highly textured portraits of hyper-masculine figures engaged in solitary, demanding labor. Initially, the agency experimented with a variety of rugged archetypes, deploying images of sea captains, weightlifters, war correspondents, and construction workers to see which resonated most with the anxious male psyche. Yet, the agency quickly realized that while these figures projected strength, they lacked a unifying, mythic resonance that could scale globally. The sea captain felt too niche, the weightlifter too vain, and the construction worker too tethered to urban civilization. The American consumer needed a symbol of absolute, untethered independence, a figure who answered to no boss, who conquered the elements, and who stood alone against the vast, untamed horizon. The cowboy emerged not just as a creative option, but as the only logical avatar capable of executing this psychological conquest. Burnett's team meticulously crafted the visual language of this new frontier to ensure the masculine coding was impenetrable. They introduced the concept of Marlboro Country, a sprawling, cinematic landscape where men were stoic and the elements were unforgiving. To further distance the cigarette from its elegant origins, the agency mandated a crucial artificial visual detail in the early advertisements. Every model featured bore a prominent, stenciled tattoo on the back of his hand, usually an anchor or a military insignia, serving as a subconscious cue of a rugged, violent past that a mere filter could never dilute. The market response to this calculated mythology was instantaneous and financially staggering. Within a single year of the campaign's launch, sales skyrocketed by an unprecedented 3,000%, generating massive revenue that shocked the industry. The brand leaped from a forgotten bottom-tier product to the fourth most popular cigarette in the United States almost overnight. Men who had previously hidden their filtered cigarettes now proudly displayed the iconic red hardpack, eager to associate themselves with the untamed independence radiating from the billboards. This meteoric rise redefined the entire landscape of consumer marketing, proving that a product's physical reality was entirely secondary to its psychological packaging. The tobacco inside the paper had barely changed, but the emotional payload delivered to the consumer had been completely rewritten. It was a masterclass in semiotics, demonstrating that a corporation could sell a feeling of rugged individualism to a man sitting in a claustrophobic office cubicle simply by associating the product with a mythical American frontier. As the campaign matured throughout the following decade, the agency realized that to maintain their dominant market position, they had to push the authenticity even further. They abandoned professional actors altogether, deeming the polished, chiseled faces of Hollywood too synthetic for the raw reality the brand now demanded. Burnett's scouts ventured into the actual American West, hiring real ranch hands, rodeo riders, and horse trainers. These men did not need makeup or direction. Their sun-baked skin, calloused hands, and natural swagger provided an unassailable credibility that crushed competing brands attempting to replicate the aesthetic. By the early 1970s, the echoes of that initial brainstorming session in Chicago had conquered the globe, establishing an empire of smoke and imagery. The brand officially became the best-selling cigarette in the world, a title it would hold for decades with an unyielding, monopolistic grip. Competitors scrambled to launch their own aggressive lifestyle campaigns, but the cowboy's shadow loomed too large over the cultural zeitgeist. The brand had achieved a level of visual saturation where the mere image of a worn saddle or a snowy mountain peak instantly triggered a craving for the product without a single word of copy being printed. However, the monumental financial success of this corporate empire carried a devastating, deeply ironic human toll. The rugged independence sold on the billboards masked a grim biological reality that eventually caught up with the faces of the franchise. The very men hired to embody health, vitality, and outdoor vigor began falling victim to the product they were paid to champion. Several of the most prominent actors and real-life cowboys who portrayed the iconic figure ultimately died of emphysema and lung cancer, transforming the ultimate symbol of American vitality into a tragic, undeniable casualty of corporate ambition. This dark irony forced a global reckoning with the ethics of advertising, sparking intense backlash from public health organizations. Anti-smoking advocates seized upon the deaths of these men, dubbing the product the cowboy killer in a desperate, highly publicized bid to dismantle the mythos. They launched counter-campaigns highlighting the grim reality behind the glamour, attempting to break the psychological spell Burnett had cast. Yet the sheer momentum of the brand proved incredibly resistant to this grim reality, as the visual anchor of the cowboy had already bypassed rational thought, embedding itself directly into the aspirational desires of millions. Today, the 1950s rebrand stands as the most potent and perhaps the most lethal triumph in the history of commerce. It is studied in every elite business school as the definitive proof that corporate identity can be entirely manufactured and scaled to generate billions in sustained revenue. Philip Morris took a failing feminine accessory and, through the sheer force of Leo Burnett's creative will, forged an indestructible masculine monolith. The transformation remains a haunting testament to the terrifying power of a well-told story, proving that with the right image, a brand can completely overwrite its own genesis and reshape the desires of the world.